Hello there and welcome. Today we're diving into a topic that, on the surface, seems pretty simple: classroom observation. But as we're about to find out, this everyday practice is packed with hidden complexities. It's meant to help us improve, but it turns out the design of how we do it, well, that changes everything. Right, let's start with something a bit mind-bending from the world of quantum mechanics. You see, tiny particles, like electrons, when you're not looking at them, act like spreading waves. They can travel through multiple paths all at once, creating this beautiful, complex pattern of possibilities. But, and here's the crazy part, the very second you try to observe which path that particle takes, the whole thing vanishes. The wave collapses, and the electron suddenly behaves like a tiny solid marble stuck in one single spot. The act of measuring it literally changes its reality. It's a wild idea, isn't it? But it really makes you wonder, what if the same thing happens in our classrooms? What if the very act of watching, of measuring teaching, fundamentally alters it? And, more importantly, what if it doesn't always change it for the better? Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at this observer effect in education, then explore the two paths it can lead to: synergy or surveillance. After that, we'll dig into the anatomy of trust, lay out a practical blueprint for change, and wrap up with a crucial choice every school has to make. So, let's start at the beginning. Classroom observation started with the best of intentions, right? It was meant to be a tool for professional development, for growth. But somewhere along the way, for many people, that goal got twisted into a feeling of pressure. And that pressure leads to this key idea, performativity. It's a fancy word for something pretty simple. It's when lecturers feel they have to put on a show for the observer. Instead of teaching to the real, genuine needs of the students in front of them, they end up teaching to a checklist. It encourages safe, formulaic lessons, not the creative, responsive teaching we all want to see. And this brings us to a fork in the road, really. It shows us there are two completely different ways to think about observation. The way an institution designs its system sends a huge signal about its culture. It's a proxy for how much they actually trust their staff. Is this about control, or is it about growing together? This quote just hits the nail on the head. When you get what's called an audit culture, where everything has to be measured, ranked, and proven, trust is often the first thing to go out the window. And right alongside it goes a lecturer's autonomy, their freedom to make professional judgments. Now, this is the model that fuels that kind of culture. Researchers call it the apex architecture. You can see it right there. It's a classic pyramid. All the power and decisions are concentrated at the top. Observation here isn't about development, it's a transaction. It's a top-down, box-ticking exercise designed to ensure compliance. And that top-down approach inevitably creates this really destructive feedback loop. These high-stakes, subjective judgments from the top create stress and take away autonomy. And what does that do? It fuels that performativity we talked about, which kills the very creativity and risk-taking you need for genuine improvement. It's a vicious cycle. But, and this is so important, it absolutely does not have to be this way. The research shows us there's a really powerful alternative, one that's built from the ground up on professional trust and real collaboration. It's about moving away from that feeling of surveillance. And here you can see the choice, laid out plain and simple. On the left, you've got that top-down apex model. But on the right, you see the alternative, a novel architecture. It's not a pyramid at all, is it? It's a network, built on a model of peer coaching, where the real goal is for everyone to learn from each other. So how does this novel architecture actually work? Well, for starters, decision-making is shared out amongst professional teams. Observation stops being a judgment and becomes a process of inquiry, of genuine curiosity. The whole focus shifts from just complying with rules to actually getting better. And the result? You protect and empower professional expertise. Now, this is crucial. This isn't just some nice, fuzzy idea about teamwork. The power of this approach is actually backed up by some seriously robust, hard data that shows just how deeply these practices are connected. For instance, a recent study found an incredibly strong positive correlation, that's an R value of 0.81, between the teacher's ability to reflect on their own practice and their habit of reflecting with their colleagues. This is huge. It proves that working together and thinking deeply about our work aren't just good ideas. They're measurable skills that actively reinforce one another. Okay, so if we know this developmental model is so much more effective, the big question is, how do we actually bring it to life? Well, the great news is the research gives us a really clear, practical blueprint to follow. At the heart of this new model isn't some big, scary, one-off observation. No, the engine driving it is a short, repeatable 5-step cycle. It's designed to be low stakes, focused on curiosity, and all about making small, continuous improvements. Let's quickly walk through it. It starts with co-planning, where you agree on one small, narrow thing to focus on. Then comes a micro-observation, just a short visit, maybe 20 minutes, to gather evidence, not pass judgment. Soon after, you sit down for a joint analysis to look at that evidence together and find the key leverage point. That leads to trying out a small test of change, and finally, a quick follow-up to see what you learned and decide what to focus on next. See? It's a cycle of improvement. Now, to make this work across a whole institution, leaders need to put 3 simple things in place. First, adopt a really simple 1-page rubric with no scores. Second, schedule these cycles in advance so that the time is protected. And third, run regular calibration huddles to make sure all the observers are on the same page, keeping things consistent and fair. So when you pull it all together, what this research really does is present every school, every university with a very clear and deliberate choice. It's not about whether to observe or not. It's about choosing between 2 completely different philosophies of what it means to improve. Then this image just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have surveillance by default. That's what happens when your systems are messy and high stakes, and it all hinges on one big judgmental event. The alternative? Development by design. That's where you have a single clear formative purpose and a system built around those short, iterative, and carefully calibrated cycles of inquiry. And the outcomes of these 2 paths? They couldn't be more different. Surveillance by default, that leads to performativity, broken trust, and a culture of just ticking boxes. But when you intentionally design for development, you get professional agency, truly actionable feedback, and a vibrant culture of learning together. And if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. You cannot simply command people to get better through observation. It just doesn't work. Improvement only happens when the entire system is thoughtfully and purposely designed to make it happen. And so we've come full circle, back to that idea from quantum physics. Observation in our classrooms is never a neutral act. It actively shapes the very world it sees. So the really powerful question this research leaves us with is this: what kind of world and what kind of teaching do we want to choose to create?